This happened to me about a number of years ago, and I have never forgotten. One night, as I was lying in bed trying to get some sleep, my black cat Sabrina scratched at my bedroom door to be let out. Tired, but mostly awake, I slipped out of bed and shuffled to my door and let her go out. However, she looked at me and guided me to the side door to go outside. I went to the door and opened it, then pushed the screen door out of the way so she could leave. However, after I closed the screen door, I happened to look out across the way, which happens to be the side of the neighbor's house. In the driveway, blocking a bit of their house, is my dad's 1995 Chevy truck. On the other side of my dad's truck, I saw a strange figure standing by the hood. I could only see its shoulders and up. It had a larger head than its body, from what I could see. Its neck was thin, and its shoulders were bony-looking. Whatever it was had two large, empty eye sockets where eyes should be, but weren't. They were pitch black, like two voids against its pale skin. Now, the rest of the face I could never forget. It looked like the upper half of its face was covered in skin, and the lower it went towards its jaws, it looked shredded up. Where the jaw was located was complete bone, and it had a wide, toothy grin as it just stood there and seemed to be looking right at me. Mind you, I wear glasses to see distances, and I thought maybe I was seeing some kind of blur of the bushes or something from the neighbor's house, so I squinted my eyes to get a better look. It made it worse. I saw even more details of the creature than I did before squinting. Everything about its appearance became more clear and detailed. The texture of the skin, the wrinkles, the bits of torn-up-looking flesh. There was no mistaking what I saw now. Terrified, I closed the side door and locked it. I was breathing heavily as my heart raced in my chest. Even then, I tried to reason with myself that maybe what I saw wasn't real. But I couldn't shake it. I know what I saw. Still scared, I ran into my room and jumped into bed. I was in my 30s, yet I took my blankets and hid under the covers like a kid. After all these years, I suddenly felt the way I used to feel as a child when I woke up to vivid night terrors. That fear of not being able to escape the horrors of my imagination. Feeling completely alone and vulnerable, even though my parents were across the way in their bedroom. As I hid under the blankets, I suddenly heard long, continuous scratches on my wall by where the creature was seen. It was like it was in my room and running a nail along my bumpy bedroom wall. I could hear the nail lightly thump each time it hit them. My panicking grew, and I felt more and more at the mercy of childhood trauma. I started to cry and tried to talk myself out of this fear that gripped me. Maybe this thing fed on fear? I thought to myself. Maybe it was getting a rise out me and using my fear for its enjoyment. I tried to calm down and tell myself that everything was okay. As I was starting to relax, the scratching finally stopped and everything went quiet. After all I had been through and seen, I continued to try and convince myself that I was still seeing things. The next night, as the cat wanted to go outside again, and I reluctantly looked in the location of where the creature had stood behind the hood of my dad's truck. Nothing in the area looked like the creature at all, not even any of the features. That's when I settled with myself that what I saw was real, and that realization scared me all the more. I never want to see that thing again, and I hope it never comes back. When I was in my early 20s, my date and I decided to go to the Sail Inn in West Sacramento to play pool. We'd been there before and enjoyed speaking with the bartender. I can't recall her name, but she was a beautiful, engaging woman. This particular night, we walked in and noticed the pool table was occupied. There was a man and woman shooting a game, so my date bought us some drinks while I watched. After a few minutes, the man noticed me and struck up a conversation with me. When my date came over with our drinks, the man asked us if we wanted to shoot a game with them. It didn't occur to me at the time that his female companion hadn't yet said anything. We said yes, so he racked up the balls, and we played against them. During the game, we introduced ourselves, and right after the man began asking me some personal questions that started to bother me, like where did I live, had my date and I been dating long, did we live together, etc. I noticed the man and his friend kept looking at each other. I became increasingly uncomfortable, even though the rest of the conversation was benign and pleasant in nature. Weirdly, the woman still hadn't said anything. When the game was over, the man asked us if we wanted to leave with them to go to another bar down the street. At first, I didn't say anything. The guy asked us again, saying they discovered a cool bar not too far from where we were. My date and I looked at each other, and before he could say anything, I blurted out, "No thanks, we have dinner plans." We in fact did not have plans, but my date didn't argue with me. I think he saw the look of panic on my face. We both grabbed our jackets and got the hell out of there. By the time we walked out the door, the hair was literally standing up on the back of my neck. When we got back to my truck, my date asked me what was wrong. I told him I got a horrible feeling from those people and just knew we had to get away from them. I told him it was weird that he asked us to leave with them when he didn't check with his date first. He shrugged and said, "Okay." I think he thought I was crazy. A few days later, when I opened up the afternoon paper, there was an article in there about a woman from West Sacramento who'd been found murdered. I didn't think anything of it until I got to the page where the article was continued, and the picture of the woman practically leapt off the page at me. It was the beautiful bartender from the Sail Inn. Apparently she'd been kidnapped, raped, and killed the very night I was there with my date. I was totally creeped out and thought what a crazy coincidence that was and how sad it was that she had died so horribly. It wasn't until a month or so later that I realized why I had gotten so upset that night. A man and woman had just been arrested for the bartender's murder, along with the murders of several other people, 4 of whom were couples. There, on the front page of the Sacramento Bee, were the pictures of the killers, Gerald and Charlene Gallego, the very couple who invited my date and I to go with them to another bar. And apparently, this was one of the ruses they used to get their victims into their van. My heart did flip-flops in my chest as I read the article. Not only had we been targeted as their next serial killer victims when we turned them down, they selected another target because of me. I have lived with both relief and guilt all my life because of this. Intellectually, I know it's not my fault the bartender died, but I've always wondered how different the world would have been had she been able to live out her life, even though I would have been gone myself. Needless to say, that was the end of my bar date experiences, for a long time. I just found out Charlene Gallego has been living in Sacramento under an assumed name. Apparently she was paroled there after serving her prison term. She has been making amends for her horrors by performing works of charity. Gerald Gallego died in prison before he could be executed. I know good old Jerry got what he deserved, but I'm not sure how I feel about Charlene living as a free woman. She claimed on the stand to have been manipulated by Jerry, which is why she went along with the killing spree. Maybe that's why she never said anything in the bar. Maybe she was under his complete control, so much so that she couldn't even speak in public. I would love to have a private chat with her. I was a single mother in my mid-40s, and I had just moved to a new house with my then 4-year-old son back when we were living in our hometown of Altoona, Pennsylvania. We had only been there for a few weeks when one late night, there was a knock on our front door. My son was asleep on the couch and I was still up unpacking and putting things away. I pulled the curtain aside and looked out to see a petite young woman, standing and shivering on our porch. I opened the door only as far as the chain latch on the door would allow and asked her what she wanted. She said she had locked herself out of her house and asked if she could come in and use the phone. I asked her where she lived, and she described an address and a house about a block away and around the corner. Something about her story didn't seem right. She would have had to have passed at least a half of a dozen of houses which I noticed had their porch lights on, and there was also a still operational payphone across the street. I didn't have any change to give her and alarm bells were still going off about this. With my young son asleep in our living room, I was reluctant to let her in, but it was a chilly winter night, so I offered her a coat and my cell phone, which I handed out to her through the doorway. She took the coat and my phone. Then she called somebody but walked to the other end of the porch where I couldn't hear her, so I closed the door after telling her to put the phone in the mailbox when she was done and to bring my coat back tomorrow. She left the phone but never returned my coat. For several weeks, I got strange phone calls at all hours. People demanding to know who I was when I answered or simply hanging up. Approximately 2 to 3 months later, on the front page of Altoona's local newspaper was a picture of the young woman who had knocked at our door that night. She and 10 other suspects had been arrested in a major drug bust. I immediately got chills thinking back on that cold winter night. How she showed up in a sleeveless shirt after passing several homes in the neighborhood. I wonder what might have happened to me and my young son if I had ignored my unease and suspicions in spite of her seemingly helpless appearance. My mother told me about an incident that happened to her when she was a little girl during the Great Depression. She remembered it all her life, as though it happened yesterday. My great-grandmother lived with my mother and the family then. The town where they lived was mostly farmland and the railroad that ran through TJ center of town. One day, a boyfriend of one of my mother's aunts, who happened to be a used car salesman, was feeling generous after a big sale and was celebrating with a few drinks. He handed my great-grandmother a $20 bill and told her to go spend it wherever she wanted. Excitedly, my great-grandmother decided to walk to the grocery store about a mile away to get treats for the family. In those days, $20 was like $2,000 to some people. She took my mother's hand and they walked to the store together. At the store, loitering outside were two rough-looking men, but they didn't pay much attention to them then. They got their few items, and when my great-grandmother handed the clerk the $20 bill, the two men peered inside and appeared to take notice of the change she was handed. My mother and her grandmother walked out of the store calmly and started home across the fields. It was getting dark by now, and they had only walked a little way down the road when my great-grandmother suddenly looked frightened as she turned around to see a beat-up pickup truck with no headlights on following them. She grabbed my mother into a cornfield and whispered to her to get down as low as she could and to move as quietly and quickly as she could. They both moved deeply into the cornfield, and at one point my great-grandmother whispered to my mother to lay down on the ground and not make a sound. My mother remembers seeing the light from a lantern or flashlight moving up and down and all around as she heard the cornstalks rustling as the two men kept searching for them. After what seemed like hours to a little girl, my great-grandmother told my mother to get up and they finished their journey home. In those days, the newspapers and radio often reported being assaulted and sometimes killed for a few dollars or pennies in their pockets. My mother would still shudder and cross herself for so many years when she told this story, thinking about what might have happened to a little girl and her grandmother had those two men found them in that desolate cornfield. I have a friend who is a 7th-generation hoodoo seer and medium, and we did an exchange of goods and services back in January. I got a life path reading in exchange for making her social media marketing materials for her small business. Very quickly, she told me my sister, who I care for, has something dark attached to her. My sister is schizophrenic, and she had made the claim that something is messing with her mind, and before this reading, she was the worst mentally that I had seen in a very long time. I asked the seer to describe the entity, and she told me the exact same thing my sister had, big, dark, sticky, and has friends with it. So the seer walked me through a protection ritual, which I did, and when I got to my sister's room, I stopped at her full-length mirror and got my face real close to it to fuss with a zit, and sniff smelled like straight-up sulfur. Bad. And that smell gave me this deep primal gut feeling of danger. I took that shit outside and smashed it to hell. I didn't know what else to do. I hoped that was the right thing. For curious minds, here's more of the story that doesn't have to do with a mirror. I'm a hardcore skeptic, and even though this was a friend of mine, I still ran my little legitimacy tests throughout the reading, and I was constantly looking for signs of schizophrenia, and I'm 100% convinced she is the real deal. I waited until my sister was away to do the protection ritual. I kept her in the dark about everything because I didn't want a self-fulfilling prophecy situation. When she got home, she was the best mentally that I had seen her in over a decade. The seer said the entities were feeding off of her and bombarding her, and once I do the protection ritual, she wouldn't be surprised if my sister let out an audible gasp. The seer also told me that my sister was going to see one of the protection symbols I put up, and either rip it down or insult it and then immediately say, I don't know why I did that, and I should know that it was the dark entity speaking through her. So I drew the symbols on the actual wall so she couldn't rip them down. When she saw them, she said in a snarky tone, "I saw the swastikas you put up." Snaps out of it. I don't know why I said that. The seer also said the entity was going to be mad I took away its toy and it was going to show me. And boy did it. For the next 3 to 4 days I kept seeing movement out of the windows. I felt on edge and watched. Something would slam on the side of the house and things were falling and breaking when I was the most skid dish, etc. My 2 kitties stayed one on each side of me all the time like they were on guard. Or all 4 kitties in the house would sit in a semicircle facing a door or a window. It was the most afraid I've been in a very long time. Another thing, if note, is the seer said that there's an event in our future that's going to change a lot of things for us, and if we don't take the opportunity, we won't enter 2025. The suffering will be too much. What is particularly interesting about this is, I didn't mention to her that I had been thinking about the OL double dignified unalive, if you get my drift. Not once. And I hadn't been thinking about it in a daydreaming kind of way. I had been thinking about the logistics of putting the wheels in motion and where I was going to draw the line to execute the plan. Then she said, "So don't get the helium just yet." And my eyes instantly got wide and I froze. Suicide by helium is the plan, and I never mentioned that at all.